The house was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the moon filtering through the blinds. I had just finished a late-night conference call with a client on the West Coast, and I was exhausted. As I walked down the hallway toward our bedroom, I noticed Jessica's phone on the kitchen counter, its screen lit up with a notification. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but something compelled me to check. Maybe it was the late hour, or the way Jessica had been acting lately, distant, distracted. Almost as if her mind was somewhere else. I picked up the phone and saw a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same time?" I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I stared at the screen, the words burning into my brain. My heart pounded in my chest as 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Who the hell was this? What the hell was Jessica doing meeting someone at the same time every week? I knew I shouldn't jump to conclusions. It could be nothing. Maybe a colleague or a friend. But deep down, I felt that familiar pang of dread, the one that tells you something is horribly wrong. I tried to rationalize it, but the more I thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together. Her sudden late nights at work, the extra care she took with her appearance, the unexplained absences. I quickly put the phone back down on the counter, my hands trembling slightly. I needed to think, to process what I had just seen. But instead of confronting her right then, I decided to wait. I would find out what was going on. I had to know the truth. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread gnawing at my insides. Jessica was already up, humming softly to herself as she prepared breakfast in the kitchen. She seemed so normal, so carefree, as if nothing was amiss. But I couldn't shake the image of that message from my mind. "Morning, babe," she greeted me with a smile, planting a quick kiss on my cheek. "Coffee's ready." I mumbled a response, forcing a smile as I took the cup from her. I watched her closely, searching for any sign of guilt, any crack in her facade. But she was a perfect actress, calm, composed, and completely unaware that her world was about to unravel. As the days passed, I became more vigilant and more suspicious. I started paying attention to the little things: her phone, which she now kept closer to her at all times, the way she'd step out of the room to take certain calls, the new clothes she'd bought without mentioning them to me. I even noticed the subtle scent of cologne on her clothes that wasn't mine. Every evening, when she said she was working late or meeting up with friends, I couldn't help but wonder if she was lying to me. The thought of her with someone else made my blood boil, but I needed proof. I couldn't just accuse her without knowing for sure. One night, when she was supposedly out with her girlfriends, I decided to follow her. I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and trailed her car from a safe distance. My heart pounded as I watched her drive to a quiet, out-of-the-way bar on the other side of town. I parked a few blocks away and walked toward the entrance, keeping my head low. Through the dimly lit window, I saw her sitting at a booth in the back, laughing and smiling, something she hadn't done with me in a long time. And then, a man joined her. He slid into the booth beside her, his hand resting casually on her knee. They leaned in close, talking in hushed tones. There it was. The proof I needed. My heart shattered as I watched them, anger and betrayal coursing through me. But I didn't storm in there. I didn't confront her. Instead, I turned and walked back to my car, every step heavy with the weight of what I had just discovered. I now knew the truth. Jessica was having an affair. But instead of confronting her, I decided to play along. She had no idea I was onto her, and I intended to keep it that way, at least for now. The days that followed were torturous, but I forced myself to act normal. If Jessica suspected anything, she didn't show it. Every morning, she would kiss me goodbye before heading off to work. And every evening, she would come home with the same excuses: late meetings, after-work drinks, or dinner with friends. But I knew better now. I had to know everything. It wasn't enough to have seen her with another man. I needed to uncover the full extent of her betrayal. So, I started to dig deeper. I made excuses to stay home from work, claiming I was catching up on some paperwork. In reality, I was combing through her emails, text messages, and even her social media accounts whenever she left her phone unattended. It didn't take long to find the smoking gun. Hidden in a folder on her laptop were dozens of emails between Jessica and a man named Eric. They were filled with flirtatious banter, inside jokes, and plans for their next rendezvous. Some emails were more explicit, describing the details of their encounters in ways that made my stomach churn. They had been seeing each other for 2 years, all while Jessica pretended to be the loving, faithful wife at home. I printed out the emails, each page a stab to my heart. But I didn't stop there. I needed more evidence, more reasons to justify the anger that was building inside me. I hacked into her phone records, finding call logs and text messages between her and Eric at all hours of the day and night. She had even sent him pictures, ones that she had never sent to me. With every new discovery, my rage grew. But I kept it all to myself, carefully filing away the evidence. I wanted to confront her, to scream at her, to demand an explanation for her betrayal. But I held back. If I confronted her now, it would only give her a chance to twist the story, to deny or downplay what she had done. No, I needed to be patient. I needed to wait for the right moment to strike. Knowing the truth was a burden I hadn't anticipated. The more I learned, the more the weight of it crushed me. Every time Jessica smiled at me, every time she reached for my hand, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I found myself questioning every moment we had shared over the last 10 years. Was any of it real? Had she ever truly loved me, or had it all been a lie? I became obsessed with the details of her affair, replaying every conversation, every touch, every kiss in my mind. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had done to drive her into another man's arms. Was it my fault? Had I neglected her, failed to make her feel loved and desired? But then, the anger would take over. How dare she betray me after everything we had built together? We had a life, a family, a future. And she had thrown it all away for cheap thrills with some asshole from work. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't about me. This was her choice, her decision to break our vows and destroy our marriage. I started to distance myself from her, emotionally shutting down. I couldn't bear to touch her, knowing where she had been, who she had been with. But I had to keep up the charade, to pretend that everything was fine. I didn't want her to suspect anything. Not yet. Jessica noticed the change in me, of course. She asked if I was okay if something was bothering me. I would brush it off, blaming stress from work or lack of sleep. She seemed concerned, but she didn't push. Maybe she was relieved, thinking that her affair was still a secret, that I was blissfully unaware of her betrayal. But I wasn't unaware. I was biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She thought she had gotten away with it, that she could continue her double life without consequence. But she was wrong. As the days turned into weeks, I began to plan my next move. Confronting her wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the same pain, the same humiliation that I was feeling. I wanted to make her suffer for what she had done to me, to us. And when the time was right, I would make sure she lost everything. Weeks passed, and the act of pretending everything was normal became easier. Jessica had no idea that I knew about her affair, no clue that I had seen the text messages, the emails, or the call logs. She continued her deception, slipping out to meet Eric while I stayed behind, feigning ignorance. But every time she left, I was one step closer to executing my plan. I needed more than just the emails and texts. I wanted irrefutable evidence, something that would make it impossible for her to deny what she had done. So, I started following her whenever she went out. I became a shadow, always one step behind her. One evening, when she said she was going out with friends, I decided to follow her again. I trailed her car, careful to keep a safe distance. My heart pounded as she drove through the city, taking the back roads to avoid traffic. Finally, she pulled into the parking lot of a hotel on the outskirts of town. I watched from a distance as she got out of the car, checking her reflection in the window before walking inside. I waited for a few minutes, then followed her inside. The lobby was quiet and dimly lit, and I kept my head down as I approached the front desk. "I'm here to meet my wife," I said to the clerk, slipping him a 20. "Room 214. The clerk barely glanced at the bill before nodding and handing me a keycard. I took it and walked down the hallway, my pulse quickening with each step. When I reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. I could hear muffled voices inside, laughter, the sound of a bottle being opened. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and nausea. I swiped the keycard and pushed the door open, stepping inside. The sight that greeted me was worse than I had imagined. Jessica was lying on the bed, her head resting on Eric's chest as they sipped champagne and whispered to each other. The shock on their faces when they saw me was almost worth it. "Almost. Having a good time?" I asked, my voice cold, devoid of emotion. Jessica scrambled off the bed, her face draining of color. "Michael. I can explain." "Don't bother," I cut her off, my gaze shifting to Eric, who was hastily pulling on his clothes. "You might want to leave before things get ugly." Eric didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his jacket and bolted for the door, not even sparing a glance at Jessica. I watched him go, then turned back to her. She was standing there, trembling, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, Michael, let me explain." But I wasn't interested in her excuses. I had what I needed, more than enough proof to destroy her, to take everything she had worked so hard to protect. "I'm not here to listen to your lies," I said, stepping closer until I was inches away from her. "I'm here to let you know that it's over." Her eyes widened in fear, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the terror she had inflicted on me. It was a small victory, but it was enough to fuel my resolve. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said, turning on my heel and walking out of the room, leaving her standing there, broken and alone. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The confrontation had gone exactly as I had planned, yet I felt no satisfaction. The anger and betrayal still gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the woman who had destroyed our marriage. When I arrived home, the house was dark and quiet, just as I had left it. I sat down on the couch, staring at the blank television screen, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. I could confront her again, demand answers, force her to explain why she had done this to me. But what would that accomplish? She would lie. She would make excuses, and in the end, I would be left with nothing but empty words. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to hit her where it hurt the most. Jessica had always been proud of the life we had built together, the house, the cars, the reputation she had cultivated among our friends and family. She loved the image of the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect partner. And that was exactly what I was going to take away from her. Over the next few days, I set my plan into motion. I called our bank and opened a separate account in my name only, slowly transferring funds from our joint accounts without raising suspicion. I contacted a lawyer, discreetly gathering information about the divorce process and what I would need to secure full custody of our children. I even reached out to a private investigator, ensuring I had every piece of evidence necessary to prove Jessica's infidelity in court. But it wasn't just about the legal battle. I wanted her to suffer emotionally. To feel the same pain and humiliation she had inflicted on me. So, I started planting seeds of doubt among our friends and family, dropping subtle hints about her behavior, her sudden absences, and the strain on our marriage. I knew it would only be a matter of time before rumors started to spread before the truth came out. Jessica was oblivious to my actions, still clinging to the hope that I would forgive her and that we could somehow salvage what was left of our marriage. She apologized constantly, tried to make amends, and even suggested couples therapy. But I was done pretending. I was done giving her the benefit of the doubt. I was ready to act. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Jessica approached me in the living room, her eyes filled with desperation. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, let's try to work through this. For the kids, if nothing else." I looked at her, seeing her for what she truly was, a liar, a cheater, someone who had taken my trust and shattered it into a million pieces. I felt no pity, no compassion for the woman standing before me. "It's too late, Jessica," I said calmly, my voice void of emotion. "There's nothing left to say." The shock on her face was almost satisfying, but I knew this was only the beginning. I had waited long enough, and now it was time to take everything she held dear. My decision was made. There would be no turning back. The days blurred into weeks as I methodically set the stage for Jessica's downfall. Every interaction, every move I made was carefully calculated, designed to lead her into a false sense of security. She believed that my cold demeanor was a temporary reaction and that with enough effort, she could mend the cracks in our marriage. But I had no intention of letting her rebuild what she had so callously destroyed. I told her I needed space, and that I was considering a weekend away to clear my head. She looked relieved, probably thinking that I was finally beginning to forgive her. What she didn't know was that this weekend away was part of a much larger plan. I made sure to mention the trip to a few mutual friends, casually dropping hints about where I'd be staying, and how it was an opportunity for me to find some clarity. I even left travel brochures lying around the house, letting her see them in passing. She had no reason to suspect anything, and I could see the small glimmer of hope in her eyes each time she asked about my plans. When the weekend arrived, I packed a small bag, kissed the kids goodbye, and walked out the door as Jessica stood on the porch, watching me with a mixture of guilt and optimism. She thought she had won, that I was finally softening. Little did she know, I wasn't going anywhere. I drove to a nearby hotel, checked in under a fake name, and waited. From there, I kept a close eye on our home, confident that Jessica would use my absence as an opportunity to see Eric. She had been on edge lately, wary of me, and I knew she was desperate for comfort. That night, just as I expected, she left the house around 8 p.m. I followed her, keeping my distance, my heart pounding with anticipation. She drove to the same hotel where I had caught them before, and I watched as she parked her car and went inside. This time, I didn't bother with a keycard. I waited outside, my phone in hand, ready to document everything. After about an hour, they emerged together, laughing, their hands intertwined. I snapped photos, capturing every moment of their indiscretion. I followed them as they walked to a nearby bar, where they spent the next few hours drinking, kissing, and completely oblivious to the world around them. It was all the proof I needed. The final nail in the coffin of our marriage. When Jessica returned home the next morning, she found me sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of photos in front of me. Her smile faltered as she saw the look on my face, calm and composed, but with an underlying menace that I no longer bothered to hide. "Michael, you're back early," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "How was the trip?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pushed the photos across the table, watching as her eyes widened in shock and horror. She reached for them with shaking hands, flipping through the images of her and Eric, the color draining from her face with each one. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. "Do you understand the level of betrayal you've inflicted on this family?" "On me?" "Michael, please. I'm so sorry," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "It was a mistake, A mistake?" I interrupted, my anger barely contained. "You've been making this mistake for 2 years, Jessica. 2 years of lies, of sneaking around, of dragging me through hell while you carried on with him." She crumpled into a chair, burying her face in her hands as she sobbed. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I stood up, pacing around the room as I unleashed the full extent of my fury. "But it did, Jessica. It went far enough that you've destroyed our marriage, our family." Do you think a few tears and apologies are going to fix that? Do you think you can just erase the damage you've done? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Please, Michael, let's try to work this out. I'll do anything. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the kitchen. Love? Don't talk to me about love. You threw that away the moment you decided to betray me. And now, you're going to pay for it. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that this wasn't something she could easily talk her way out of. I leaned in closer, my voice low and menacing. I've already spoken to my lawyer. I have more than enough evidence to ensure that you lose everything: custody of the kids, the house, the money. I'm going to make sure you walk away with nothing but the consequences of your actions. Her face crumpled in despair, and she reached out, trying to grab my hand. Michael, please, don't do this. For the kids, don't do this. I pulled away, my heart hardened against her pleas. This isn't about the kids, Jessica. This is about you. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sobbing at the table. My decision was final. There would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness. I had waited long enough, and now it was time to take back control of my life, without her in it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, strategy sessions, and paperwork. My lawyer, James, was relentless, methodically building a case that would leave Jessica with nothing. He was sharp, efficient, and entirely focused on winning. I could see the fear and desperation in Jessica's eyes each time we met for mediation, but it only fueled my resolve. She tried to play the role of the remorseful wife, pleading for forgiveness, and claiming she wanted what was best for the kids. But the evidence was stacked against her. The photos, the emails, the texts, all of it painted a clear picture of her betrayal. There was no escaping the truth, and Jessica knew it. In the courtroom, she appeared fragile, her once confident demeanor shattered. I watched as she tried to explain her actions, to justify the affair as a result of feeling neglected or lonely. But her excuses fell flat. The judge saw through her attempts to garner sympathy, and with every word, she only dug herself deeper into the hole she had created. I had prepared myself for this, knowing it would be painful to relive the details of her infidelity in such a public setting. But I remained stoic, focusing on the outcome rather than the emotions. This was the final act of our marriage, and I intended to come out on top. As the proceedings dragged on, Jessica's lawyer attempted to argue for a fair division of assets, for shared custody of the children. But James was ruthless, dismantling every point they raised. He presented the affair as not just a betrayal but as evidence of Jessica's lack of moral integrity, questioning her fitness as a mother. It was harsh but necessary. The courtroom was tense, the atmosphere thick with unspoken accusations and the weight of our crumbling relationship. I could feel Jessica's eyes on me, silently pleading for mercy, for some sign that I might relent. But there was nothing left to give. She had taken everything: my trust, my love, my sense of security, and now it was my turn to take back what was mine. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted full custody of the children, the house, and the majority of our assets. Jessica was left with little more than her personal belongings and the weight of her guilt. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. There was no joy in watching her suffer, only a cold sense of justice served. As we left the courtroom, Jessica tried to speak to me, her voice trembling. Michael, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to end like this. I looked at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything, now a stranger to me. It's too late for apologies. Jessica, we're done. I turned and walked away, the finality of our divorce settling over me like a heavy cloak. The battle was over, but the war inside me had just begun. The days following the court's decision were strangely quiet. The house, once filled with the sounds of family life, now echoed with an emptiness that I hadn't anticipated. The kids were still adjusting to the new reality, their confusion and sadness palpable. I did my best to be there for them, to reassure them that everything would be okay, but the truth was, I wasn't sure of that myself. Jessica moved into a small apartment across town, and her visits with the kids were limited to weekends and holidays. Each time she came to pick them up, I could see the strain in her eyes, the weight of her choices hanging over her like a dark cloud. She was a shell of the woman I had once known, her spirit broken by the consequences of her actions. I kept myself busy, throwing myself into work and into the routine of daily life. But there was an emptiness inside me that I couldn't shake. The revenge I had sought, the justice I had demanded, had not brought me the closure I had hoped for. Instead, it left me feeling hollow. A man who had lost more than just his marriage. Friends and family offered their support, congratulating me on the outcome and assuring me that I had done the right thing. But their words felt empty, their well-meaning advice falling on deaf ears. I had won the battle, but the victory tasted bitter. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the remnants of my old life. The photos on the walls, the furniture we had picked out together. The little mementos of our years as a family, all of it reminded me of what I had lost. I had been so focused on punishing Jessica that I hadn't prepared myself for the loneliness that followed. I reached for a bottle of whiskey, poured myself a glass, and sank onto the couch. The burn of the alcohol was a welcome distraction, a brief respite from the thoughts that plagued me. But it didn't take long for the memories to flood back, the good times, the moments of happiness that now seemed like a cruel joke. As I sat there, I realized that my revenge had come at a cost. I had torn Jessica down, but in doing so, I had also torn myself apart. The anger that had driven me was gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing regret. I had let my need for retribution consume me, and now I was left with nothing but the ashes of a life I had once cherished. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache, the aftermath of too much whiskey and too little sleep. I stared at myself in the mirror, seeing the lines of stress and exhaustion etched into my face. This wasn't who I wanted to be. This wasn't the life I had envisioned. For the first time since discovering Jessica's affair, I felt a flicker of something other than anger, an overwhelming sadness for what we had lost, for what we could never get back. I had spent so long punishing her that I had forgotten to grieve for the love we had shared, for the future we had once planned together. I knew then that it was time to let go of the past, to stop letting it define me. The revenge had been served. The marriage was over, and now it was time to move forward. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way to find peace, to rebuild my life on my own terms. With a deep breath, I resolved to take the first step. The war inside me might not be over, but I was ready to start finding my way out of the darkness. It was time to heal, not just for myself, but for the sake of the children who still depended on me. I wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my own anger. It was time to start over, to find a new beginning in the aftermath of the fall. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, I began to adjust to life without Jessica. The house, once filled with reminders of our failed marriage, started to feel like my own again. I redecorated, removing the photos and mementos that tied me to the past, and replacing them with new memories, new beginnings. It was a slow process, but each change felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. The kids were adapting as well. They still had their moments of sadness, of confusion, but we were finding our rhythm. I focused on being the best father I could be, filling their days with as much love and stability as possible. We developed new routines and new traditions, and for the first time in a long time, I began to feel a sense of peace. Jessica continued to visit on weekends, but our interactions were limited to what was necessary for the children. She no longer tried to engage in conversation or seek forgiveness. The legal battles and the emotional toll of our divorce had taken their toll on her, and she seemed resigned to the new reality. I could see the regret in her eyes, the weight of her choices hanging over her like a shadow, but I no longer felt the need to hold on to my anger. It was during one of these visits that something unexpected happened. Jessica had come to pick up the kids for the weekend, and as they were packing their bags, she stood in the doorway of the living room, hesitating as if she wanted to say something. "Michael," she began, her voice softer than usual. "I know I have no right to ask this, but how are you?" "Really?" I looked up from the book I was reading, surprised by the question. It was the first time in months that she had shown any genuine concern for me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. "I'm managing," I said finally, closing the book and setting it aside. "It's been hard, but we're getting through it." She nodded, her eyes reflecting a sadness that I hadn't seen before. "I'm glad to hear that. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I hope you know how sorry I am for everything." There was a sincerity in her voice that caught me off guard. For so long, I had seen her as the enemy, the source of all my pain, but at that moment, she was just a person, flawed, broken, and full of regret. "I know you are," I said, the anger that once consumed me now replaced by something else. Acceptance, maybe even forgiveness. "And I'm sorry too. Sorry that it had to come to this." She looked down, her shoulders slumping as if a heavy burden had been lifted. "Thank you, Michael. That means more to me than you know." The kids came running down the stairs, breaking the moment as they excitedly chatted about their plans for the weekend. Jessica smiled at them, then looked back at me with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "We'll be back on Sunday," she said, and for the first time in a long time, there was no tension between us, no lingering resentment. As they left, I stood at the window, watching them drive away. I realized that while the pain of the past would never fully disappear, I was no longer defined by it. I had taken control of my life, and in doing so, I had found a sense of peace that I hadn't known was possible. It wasn't the ending I had imagined, but it was an ending nonetheless, and maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something better. As time passed, I found myself opening up to the possibility of a future that wasn't clouded by the shadows of my past. The anger, the need for revenge, had faded, replaced by a desire to build something new, not just for myself, but for the kids. They deserved a father who was whole, not one trapped by bitterness and regret. I started reconnecting with old friends, people I had pushed away during the chaos of my divorce. Slowly, I rebuilt my social life, surrounding myself with positive influences and people who reminded me that life could be good again. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of the past threatened to pull me back. But I was determined to move forward. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I decided to go for a walk. The air was crisp, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot as I wandered through the neighborhood. I had no destination in mind, just a need to clear my head and breathe in the cool night air. As I walked, I found myself thinking about the future, what I wanted it to look like, how I wanted to shape it. For so long, I had been living in reaction to what had happened, but now I wanted to take control. To actively create the life I wanted. The idea of dating again had crossed my mind, but it was still a distant thought, something that felt more like an abstract concept than a real possibility. I wasn't ready to open myself up to someone new, not yet. But I knew that someday, I might be, and that was enough for now. I turned a corner, passing a small park where families were gathered, children playing on the swings, couples walking hand in hand. It was a scene of simple happiness, and for the first time, I felt a spark of hope. Hope that I could find that again, in some form, even if it looked different from what I had once imagined. As I continued my walk, I made a decision. I was going to live my life fully, without letting the past dictate my every move. I had learned from my mistakes, from the pain and the anger, but I wasn't going to let them define me. I was stronger than that, and so were the kids. We had been through hell, but we had come out the other side, and now it was time to focus on the good. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. I made breakfast for the kids, their laughter filling the kitchen as they joked and teased each other. It was a normal morning, but there was something different about it, something lighter, more hopeful. As I sipped my coffee, watching them interact, I realized that we were going to be okay. Life would never be perfect, but it didn't have to be. We had each other, and that was enough. I spent the day planning for the future, making a list of things I wanted to do, places to visit with the kids, hobbies I wanted to pick up again, and goals I had set aside during the turmoil of the past few years. It felt good to look ahead, to think about what I wanted, rather than what I had lost. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat down with a glass of wine, thinking about how far I had come. The journey had been painful, filled with loss and betrayal, but it had also been one of growth, of finding my own strength. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided by his wife's infidelity. I was someone new, someone who had faced the darkness and emerged stronger on the other side. As I looked out the window at the stars twinkling in the night sky, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. It was time to move forward, to embrace whatever came next with an open heart and an open mind. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. Ready to live. Ready to love. Ready to face the world with hope and determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I could handle them. I had survived the worst, and now, it was time to thrive. Life had a funny way of surprising you when you least expected it. A year had passed since the divorce, and although the scars of the past still lingered, they had begun to heal. The kids were doing well in school, I had settled into a comfortable routine, and the dark cloud that had once hovered over me had started to dissipate. I was no longer just surviving, I was living. It was a crisp Saturday morning when I decided to take the kids to a local farmer's market. We wandered through the stalls, the smell of fresh bread and flowers filling the air. The kids were excited, darting from one vendor to the next, their laughter echoing through the crowd. It was one of those rare, perfect days, where everything seemed to fall into place. As I stood by a booth, inspecting a jar of homemade honey, I heard a familiar voice call my name. I turned, surprised to see Rachel, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She was holding a basket of vegetables, a warm smile lighting up her face. "Michael? Is that you?" she asked, her eyes wide with surprise. "Rachel. Wow. It's been ages," I replied, a smile spreading across my face. "How have you been?" We spent the next few minutes catching up, sharing the highlights and low points of the years that had passed since we last saw each other. Rachel had moved back to town a few months ago after spending years working abroad. She had always been ambitious, and it was clear she had built a successful career for herself. As we talked, I couldn't help but notice how easy it was to be around her. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just the comfort of an old friendship rekindled. The kids eventually wandered back, curious about the new person I was talking to. Rachel greeted them warmly, quickly winning them over with her easygoing charm. "Why don't we grab a coffee?" she suggested, pointing to a nearby cafe. "It'd be nice to catch up properly." I hesitated for a moment, but the kids were already nodding eagerly, excited at the prospect of hot chocolate and pastries. I agreed, and we made our way to the cafe, settling at a table by the window. As we talked, I found myself opening up to Rachel in a way I hadn't with anyone in a long time. I told her about the divorce, about the struggle to rebuild my life, and the challenges of being a single father. She listened intently, her expression sympathetic but not pitying. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said softly. "But it sounds like you've come out stronger on the other side." "I'd like to think so," I replied, grateful for her understanding. "It wasn't easy, but I've learned a lot about myself, about what I want and what I don't want in life." She smiled, nodding. "That's a good place to be. Life's too short to settle for anything less than what makes you truly happy." We spent the rest of the morning talking, the conversation flowing effortlessly. By the time we parted ways, I felt lighter, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. Rachel had always been someone I admired, and now, seeing her again, I couldn't help but wonder if this chance encounter was the beginning of something new. The weeks that followed were filled with unexpected joy. Rachel and I began seeing each other more frequently, meeting for coffee, dinners, and even a few outings with the kids. What started as a rekindling of an old friendship quickly grew into something more. Something that took me by surprise but felt entirely right. There was an ease between us, a connection that felt natural and unforced. We didn't rush things, there was no need to. We both knew what we wanted, and we were content to let things unfold at their own pace. The kids adored her, and it wasn't long before they started asking when they could see Miss Rachel again. One evening, after a particularly fun day at the park, Rachel and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The kids were inside, playing a game they had invented, their laughter drifting out through the open window. It's been a long time since I've felt this happy, I admitted, turning to look at her. I didn't think I'd ever get to this place again. Rachel smiled, reaching for my hand. You deserve to be happy, Michael. You've been through so much, but you didn't let it break you. That's something to be proud of. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her words. I never thought I'd find someone who understood me like this. Who made me feel whole again. She looked at me, her eyes soft and full of understanding. We've both had our share of struggles, but maybe that's why we work so well together. We know what it's like to face the darkness and come out the other side. There was a moment of silence as we sat there, the warmth of her hand in mine grounding me in the present. The future, once so uncertain, now felt full of possibilities. Rachel, I want to be honest with you, I began, my voice steady. I've been hurt before, and it took a lot to get to this point. But with you, it feels different. It feels right. I don't want to rush things, but I also don't want to let fear hold me back. She nodded, her smile reassuring. I feel the same way. Let's take it one step at a time, but let's take those steps together. At that moment, I knew that this was the start of something real, something that had the potential to grow into the kind of love I had once believed in. It wouldn't be perfect. And there would be challenges, but I was ready to face them, with Rachel by my side. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the yard, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me here, to this moment, to this new beginning. The past no longer held me captive. I had faced it, learned from it, and moved on. Now, I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it might bring. And as Rachel leaned her head on my shoulder, I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was truly happy. Months passed, and the relationship between Rachel and me continued to grow stronger. What started as a cautious exploration had blossomed into a deep connection. The kids were thriving, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of wholeness, of having a family again. Life was moving forward, and with each passing day, the wounds of the past faded further into the background. But there was one final piece of the puzzle that needed to be addressed: closure with Jessica. We had maintained a civil relationship for the sake of the children, but there were still unresolved emotions and lingering questions that had never been fully answered. It was something I had been avoiding, unsure if I was ready to face it, but I knew that to truly move on, I needed to confront the past one last time. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided to call Jessica. My heart raced as I waited for her to answer, unsure of how the conversation would go. When she picked up, there was a moment of silence before she spoke. "Michael," she said, her voice cautious. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine," I replied, taking a deep breath. I think we need to talk. About everything. The divorce, the affair, all of it." She didn't respond immediately, and I could sense the hesitation on the other end of the line. Finally, she sighed. "I've been thinking about that too. There's a lot we never really dealt with, isn't there?" "Yeah, there is," I agreed. "I think it's time we faced it, for our own sakes, and for the kids." We decided to meet the next day at a nearby park, a neutral place where we could talk without the pressure of being at either of our homes. As I drove to the park, I felt a mix of emotions, nervousness and dread, but also a sense of determination. This was something that needed to happen. When I arrived, Jessica was already there, sitting on a bench under a large oak tree. She looked up as I approached, offering a tentative smile. I returned it, taking a seat beside her. For a few moments, we sat in silence, neither of us sure how to begin. "It's strange, isn't it?" she finally said, breaking the silence. "How things turned out. This isn't where I thought we'd be." "Me neither," I admitted, glancing at her. "But here we are." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I know I've said it before, but I'm truly sorry for everything, Michael. I know I hurt you in ways I can never fully make up for." "I believe you," I said, surprising even myself with the sincerity in my voice. "And I've realized that holding on to that hurt isn't doing me any good. I don't want to carry it with me anymore." She looked up, her eyes shining with emotion. "I never wanted to destroy our family. I lost myself somewhere along the way. And by the time I realized what I was doing, it was too late." "I know," I replied, my tone gentle. "We both made mistakes. And while it was hell going through it, I think we're both better people on the other side." I've had time to think, to reflect, and I've come to understand that we were both trapped in a marriage that wasn't working anymore. The affair was just a symptom of deeper issues. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I've thought about that a lot too. I wish I had handled things differently, that I had been honest with you instead of running away. But I was scared of losing everything, scared of what my life would look like without you." "We can't change the past," I said softly. "But we can learn from it. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm moving on, Jessica. I've met someone, Rachel, and she makes me happy. The kids like her, and I feel like I'm finally ready to start a new chapter." A shadow of sadness crossed her face, but she managed a small smile. "I'm glad, Michael. You deserve to be happy. I hope you know that I never wanted to take that away from you." "I know," I said, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. "And I hope you find happiness too, Jessica. We're not the same people we were, and that's okay. We've both grown, and maybe this is how it was meant to be." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation lifting, leaving us both feeling lighter. There was no anger, no bitterness, just two people who had shared a life together, acknowledging the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. "Thank you," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "For everything. And for giving me this chance to say goodbye properly." "Goodbye doesn't mean we'll never see each other again," I replied, smiling. "We'll always be connected through the kids. But I think this is a goodbye to the past, to the pain. It's time to let it go." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "You're right. It's time." We stood up, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. There was no need for more words. We had said all that needed to be said. As we walked away from the park, going our separate ways, I felt a profound sense of closure. Of finally being at peace with the past. That night, I went home and sat on the porch, the cool evening air wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. The journey had been long and difficult, but I had made it. I had faced my demons, made peace with my past, and found the strength to move forward. As I sat there, looking up at the stars, I knew that I was ready to embrace whatever the future held, with an open heart and a clear mind. The past was behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.